In 1991, police pulled over a seemingly calm, soft-spoken man in Wisconsin after a strange complaint from a frightened teenager. The officers found the man polite, cooperative, even oddly relaxed. Nothing about him immediately screamed danger. Moments later, they entered his apartment and discovered something horrifying. Human remains, photographs of dismembered bodies, and evidence of crimes so disturbing they would shock the entire world. That man was Jeffrey Dahmer. Dahmer is often cited as an organized, emotionally cold, and disturbingly composed man. Now compare that to another infamous criminal, Richard Ramirez, better known as the Night Stalker. Unlike Dahmer, Ramirez was impulsive and terrifyingly unpredictable. He committed violent crimes across California during the 1980s, often acting recklessly and leaving behind scenes that reflected rage and disorder rather than careful planning. Now, most people would probably say the second man sounds like a psychopath, but what if we told you there is another personality type often confused with psychopathy that could look very different? One might be calm, calculated, and strangely charming. The other might be impulsive, explosive, and impossible to predict. Movies often lump them together, the internet throws the words around like confetti, and chances are, somebody you dislike has probably been called one before. But psychopaths and sociopaths are not exactly the same thing. In this video, we are breaking down psychopath versus sociopath, where these labels came from, how these people think, why they behave the way they do, and whether one is actually more dangerous than the other. And the answer might not be what you think. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell button so you can stay up to date with all our videos. We'll start with an important question. What exactly are psychopaths and sociopaths? Interestingly enough, neither term is actually an official diagnosis in modern psychology. That surprises a lot of people, because these words are everywhere, but technically speaking, both psychopathy and sociopathy usually fall under a broader diagnosis known as antisocial personality disorder, or ASPD. Psychopathy has been studied for centuries in one form or another. In the 1940s, psychiatrist Hervey Cleckley famously described psychopaths as people wearing what he called a mask of sanity. In other words, they could appear completely normal while lacking something most of us take for granted: empathy. Researchers today often believe psychopathy has strong biological roots. Brain scans have shown that some individuals with psychopathic traits may have reduced activity in areas linked to fear, emotional processing, and empathy. To put it simply, many experts believe psychopaths may be born with brains wired differently. That does not necessarily mean every psychopath becomes violent, but it may explain why some seem emotionally detached from the suffering of others. Sociopathy, on the other hand, is often viewed differently. While psychopaths are frequently described as born, sociopaths are more commonly thought to be made. Childhood trauma, neglect, abuse, unstable environments, or exposure to violence are often considered contributing factors. Think of psychopathy as nature leaning heavily on the scale, while sociopathy may involve more nurture gone terribly wrong. So if both can manipulate people, break rules, and show little regard for others, what actually separates them? One of the biggest differences comes down to emotion. Contrary to popular belief, psychopaths are not emotionless robots wandering around plotting evil schemes. They can feel emotions, but many psychologists believe those emotions are shallow or muted. A psychopath may understand what sadness looks like, may even know exactly what words to say to comfort someone, but inside, they might not genuinely feel the emotional weight of the situation. This ability to imitate emotion can make psychopaths surprisingly convincing. In fact, some are described as charming, charismatic, and highly intelligent. You may have heard the saying that some psychopaths wear suits instead of prison uniforms. Researchers have even explored the idea of successful psychopaths, people with psychopathic traits who thrive in business, politics, or high-pressure careers. After all, if fear and guilt barely slow you down, negotiations may feel a lot easier. Sociopaths, however, are often more emotionally volatile. Unlike psychopaths, sociopaths are usually capable of forming attachments, though those relationships can be unstable or unhealthy. They may become angry quickly, struggle to control impulses, and react emotionally rather than strategically. If a psychopath is ice cold, a sociopath is often boiling over. This difference becomes even clearer when we talk about behavior. If a psychopath commits a crime, those crimes are often carefully planned. A psychopath may spend years building trust with someone simply to exploit them later. A commonly discussed example is Ted Bundy. Bundy was intelligent, charming, and socially capable. Many victims trusted him because he appeared normal, even likable. In court, he often represented himself and seemed disturbingly composed. Sociopaths, meanwhile, are usually less calculated. Their behavior is often impulsive and reckless. Imagine someone getting into violent arguments, constantly losing jobs, struggling to maintain friendships, or making terrible decisions in moments of anger. If a sociopath commits violence, it may happen suddenly during an emotional outburst rather than after months of careful planning. A simple way to think about it is this. A psychopath may scam you over 5 years while smiling at family dinners. A sociopath might punch a stranger in a parking lot after feeling insulted. Both can be dangerous, but in very different ways. So are psychopaths actually more dangerous? Well, this is where things become complicated. Psychopaths are often considered more dangerous because they can hide in plain sight. They may appear successful, trustworthy, and calm under pressure. Some studies have suggested psychopathic traits are overrepresented in certain leadership positions. That does not mean your boss is secretly plotting world domination. But traits like confidence, charm, fearlessness, and emotional detachment can sometimes be rewarded in competitive environments. Cases like Bernie Madoff are often used when discussing corporate psychopathy. Madoff orchestrated one of the largest financial frauds in history while appearing respectable and trustworthy for years. Thousands lost their savings, yet he managed to maintain a calm, polished image throughout much of the deception. Sociopaths, however, can be dangerous in another way. Their impulsiveness makes them harder to predict. While psychopaths may carefully think through consequences, sociopaths may lash out emotionally with little warning. Can you actually spot one? Well, maybe, but not as easily as the internet would have you believe. Psychopaths are often described as manipulative, dishonest, fearless, and lacking remorse. They may lie effortlessly and remain oddly calm during situations that would terrify most people. As psychologist Robert Hare once said, psychopaths know the words but not the music of emotion. Sociopaths often display different patterns, but before you diagnose your annoying coworker, your ex, or that rude cashier, remember something important. Being selfish, toxic, or cold does not automatically make someone a psychopath or sociopath. Only trained mental health professionals can diagnose personality disorders, and even then, it is complicated. Human beings are messy. Some people are manipulative without being psychopathic. Others struggle with empathy due to trauma, stress, or entirely different mental health conditions. But what is life actually like for the people around them? For loved ones, relationships with psychopaths are often described as emotionally exhausting and deeply confusing. Some survivors talk about being manipulated so gradually that they barely noticed it happening. Relationships with sociopaths can look different but still become deeply destructive. One day, everything feels normal. The next day, everything explodes. Many people who leave these relationships describe constantly feeling on edge, never knowing what version of the person they were going to get. Psychopaths and sociopaths share similarities. Both are linked to antisocial personality disorder. Both may manipulate people, break rules, and show reduced empathy or remorse. But the biggest difference usually comes down to control. Psychopaths are generally more calculated, while sociopaths are more impulsive, reactive, and easier to spot. The truly unsettling part is that the most dangerous person in the room does not always look dangerous. Sometimes they are loud and unpredictable. Other times they are calm, charming, and smiling right at you. So would you rather deal with a psychopath or a sociopath? Let us know in the comments below, and as always, thanks for watching.